So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third session of the summer term 2026 of Sunoikisis's Digital Classics. This term, as you know very well by now, is dedicated to exploring digital scholarly editions in classics, Byzantine, and medieval studies. And today's session will be dealing with methods and ways to go from the manuscript to the digital scholarly edition. And our speaker today is my colleague, a very good friend, Hannah Busch from the University of Cologne. And as always, if you're watching live, that is on the 5th of May 2026, feel free to write in the live comment section of the YouTube video and tell us where you're watching from and ask questions or leave comments that our speaker will address at the end of the session. And if you're not watching live, you will enjoy a very nice discussion. And as always, today we have a lot to cover and too little time. So I would say that without further ado, I'd like to leave the floor to today's speaker. So Hannah, please go ahead. The floor is yours, and I will share your screen.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction and the invitation to speak today. So I speak from the manuscript to the digital scholarly edition, and maybe as a little disclaimer, I'm going to look at the digital scholarly edition more from the point of view of the document and not of the text. But you will see that in the progress of this session. So I made a little schedule and we will start and I will briefly talk about collections and editions and then dedicate the second part to the session from parchment to cyberspace, where we look at the process of digitization, going more into detail with imaging techniques, interfaces, the metadata, and in the end, I give a little outlook into the research with digitized sources that are actually not digital editions. So most of you have probably worked with digital collections and virtual manuscript libraries, and you might have already seen on the webpage of the session and in the text that I advised to read, or that I gave as a reading recommendation, the introduction to the digital Middle Ages. So there are some overlappings, and also some of the projects I present today will appear later or be part of the exercise. So I have here 4 prominent examples of virtual manuscript libraries or collections, which is the Swiss eCodices, which is the Swiss manuscript library, where manuscripts from all over Switzerland are digitized, and the eCodices NL, which is the virtual reading room for manuscripts in Dutch collections that has been launched, I think, 3 years ago. Then the example of the Bibliotheca Palatina digital, which is a virtual reconstruction of a medieval library, which basically has been, so the collection is partially in Heidelberg and partially in Rome, and I think maybe also in some other private collections. And the aim of the project was to bring all the manuscripts from this medieval library together in one manuscript portal, which is basically the first time all manuscripts are actually in one place. And one example that I like a lot, which is the Sinai Manuscripts Digital Library with the manuscripts from the St. Catherine's Monastery of Sinai in Egypt. And while I was composing this lecture, I also realized that many of the examples are not that recent. And since now all the digital developments grow so fast and so steady, I was considering to say, okay, this is maybe not, this lecture is not up to date anymore, but actually it will always be up to date in terms of that we will always deal with the same manuscripts collections, and that these examples are still very good examples for digitization projects. And yeah, eCodices NL is also quite recent, and the Bibliotheca Palatina is also has been completed quite recently. And eCodices is they're all ongoing. So while I come from a background with Latin manuscripts from the medieval times, I also want to focus a bit on papyri collections And here I just put the example of the Cologne papyrus collection. I actually can't say that much about it because I'm not an expert in the digitization of papyri, but for many of you, this might be familiar interface from your own studies and research. So then we also have editions that are based on medieval manuscripts. One of my favorite examples is actually the Welcher Gast Digital, which in English is The Roman's Stranger, a manuscript in Middle High German. I think there are about 24 copies that have survived, and there's a very nice edition from the Heidelberg University Library that is very interactive. And yeah, the Welcher Gast is actually a lecture on courtesy, courtly love, and a code of conduct for the young person in the Middle Ages. I think the original is from the 13th century. And the Archimedes palimpsest is another example, and I was not sure if I put it into editions or if it's more of a collection. But it's the reconstruction of a palimpsest that was found in a codex. And there's also a very nice TED talk about it by Will Noel that I can recommend watching. You can find it on YouTube very easily. So you might have always wondered how actually books are digitized and what are the processes behind it and the technologies. And I will take a look into that in the next minutes. Yeah, I borrowed the title to this session from Parchment to Cyberspace, from the material book to digital representation, a short overview from a book from by Stephen G. Nichols that deals with the Roman de la Rose and the digital edition. But I think it expresses quite well the entire process from Parchment to cyberspace. So I'm not sure if everyone is familiar, but Parchment is actually animal skin. And if we talked from Parchment to cyberspace, we might want to look at the process, how a book is made. So we have the sheep or calf or other animals, goats. We make the material for the writing support, and then it's turned into book blocks and books that are bound. And that they're usually stored in cultural heritage institutions. And the way we used to access cultural heritage institution was for years the printed or the card catalog. And what we mostly interact with is the virtual or digital catalog. So it's basically turned the printed catalog into a database where we can search for books that are stored in a library. If we want to turn the library into a virtual or digital library, we need to do a photographic reproduction of the books. And then we need to do some processing and publication. So we have the catalog entry and we have the digital photograph, and we might have a search interface. And then we have some code, and we can use a search facet to access both the catalog entry and the digital book. And usually this happens with an interface that also contains a viewer that allows us to view the book in a double-sided or single-sided view. And we also have new technologies like IIIF that allows us to import also manuscripts from other virtual libraries. But I will get back to this later. So when we talk about the digital facsimile, I always want to point out that the reproduction is not the original. I think that was also mentioned in the paper that I suggested reading, that there is some sort of disjunction between the object that is studied and the representation of that object in the digital analysis. So often we look still at the original object, but we slowly work with digital objects. And so I just want to keep in mind that when we look at the digital facsimile of a manuscript or papyrus or any other text-bearing object, we should keep in mind that the proportions might appear differently on our screens. The color fastness might change, the different dimensionalities, and also artifacts, noise, and errors in the images, like the light, or some dirt on the page or on the lens. And there are also methods we can use to avoid or to reduce those effects of digital photography, which is the color checker and the scale, and also maybe the calculation of systematic deviations if we want to process many images at once. So here you can see two covers of books. It's both from the virtual library construction of St. Matthias in Trier, a project that I worked in, worked for or with the manuscripts until 10 years ago, I think. And I think what always struck me is when you look at these images, you would always think that the right book is much larger than the one on the left side. But when you have the color checker and the ruler, you can see that actually the right book is relatively tiny and the left book is much larger. So it is so important to have some object of reference, and ideally you have a ruler so you can actually reconstruct the original measures of the original book when you study the object or look at it, because it might give a completely wrong impression. Yeah, and sometimes you have to be creative to get the right measures of the book. I'm not telling where this was done and who has done this, but I just say don't imitate. But yeah, books are fragile and small, and sometimes all the library has is a big ruler, so you have to become creative to get the measurements on the virtual image. So in the next section, we are going to look at some imaging techniques, and basically it's just two imaging techniques. One is the photographic reproduction, and one is one of my favorite imaging techniques for handwritten objects. So usually manuscripts are digitized with a digital camera, so with the means of digital photography. And here you see two images from the digitization of the medieval manuscripts at the Tresor archive and library in Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. And we used a Graz conservation copy stand, the so-called Traveler, which is a very handy table where you can install the camera. It has LED lights. It has a support for the book where you can adjust the distance, and you don't have the book to open the book completely to take pictures. And it fits in a suitcase, so you can also travel to remote locations. And so, for example, if a book can't is stored in a monastery or in a library and it can't be brought to a bigger digitization center, which can also be tricky because of the insurance. And so what we did for the EcoDC's Netherlands project, we traveled to small libraries in the Netherlands with a copy stand and digitized on location. And that's actually how many digitization projects do it. There are also tools to digitize more fragile books, for example, the so-called Wolfenbüttler book mirror. And it's used for books that you should not open for more than 45 degrees. And you take pictures by photographing through a mirror. And what I find the most interesting about all these conservation copy stands is that they usually have been developed at libraries. So the Graz table has been developed, I think, by Manfred Meyer in Graz. There's also the larger version. And the book mirror from Wolfenbüttel obviously has been developed in Wolfenbüttel. And then I think those tables are sold all over the world to libraries for digitization processes to do as little damage as possible to the books and avoid opening old bindings. So how to digitize manuscripts? Usually you have limited access to the book, and it's also very time consuming. So it's important that you make sure you take all the pictures you need in one go. And that's why we always had like a checklist. So you photograph the front and the back. You also take pictures with a color checker and the color checker on the page and on the cover to go for color calibration, and you count all the pages and see if there is a difference between the number of the leaves and the page counting that is written on the page, which often happens actually, also because usually medieval books did not have a page number, they had quires. So you double check it, and sometimes those pages also have holes. So you take a second picture with acid-free paper underneath to keep those holes visible also in the virtual object. And then you do some post-processing, which is crucial because within one digitization project, the camera or the scanner, which nowadays is not often used anymore, I think, for medieval books. But this slide is from an earlier digitization process. So within the project, the scanner was changed to a scanner with a higher resolution, and the scans looked a bit different. So we calibrated them with the help of the color checker, and in the end, you receive images that contain the same color values. So it's always important to keep track of the tools and the date of digitization. And then, of course, you add the metadata, so the shelf mark and the pages to the digital image. So you have to do some editing to put together the catalog data and the descriptive metadata and the images. So the second imaging technique is multispectral imaging, which can be used a lot in art history, but also for manuscripts. And you can make visible underlying layers of color or ink by using different wavelengths of light. So it's used to recover lost texts. For example, the recovery of undertext in a palimpsest, faded text, erasures. So if you, for example, have water damage, fire damage, damages caused by all sorts of aging of the historic handwritten object. So I brought some two examples for palimpsests. This one is the Trier Apocalypse. It's a manuscript from the 9th century. It's written in a Antrill script on parchment, and in the major part of this manuscript, the text has been erased and overwritten. So with the means of MSI, we could recover the lost text, and probably because it was a book conserved in a monastery, it could be possible that someone wanted to rewrite or retranslate the original text in a different language because they did not want, they thought it was not appropriate, maybe, the text that was written on the page, so they rewrote it. And the second example, so I composed lots of the slides for a seminar I gave in Bari last year. And the day before, we went to the museum where the role of the Exalted was exposed. And I was looking at it and I was like, oh, there is actually also palimpsest on the page. And I think, so that here it seems like the notation has been changed. And that is, I think, quite an often phenomenon that music trends change. And so you can see that the musical notation has been erased and overwritten. You can still see a bit the underlying notation shining through, I guess, but it would be interesting to recover what is underneath. So how does how does MSI work? Multispectral imaging systems do not only consist of a camera, but also of different lights and a special lens. So you take pictures in different lights, and then you also need specific image processing software, and different things become visible in light with different wavelengths. It's a non-invasive method, but it's very time-consuming. So sometimes you ask, why not digitize manuscripts right away with MSI? Because you have to take several pictures of every page, and because the setup is quite expensive, and yeah, it's also the data storage that you need. So they did it for the Archimedes palimpsest because that's how they discovered what was written underneath, that it was actually Archimedes. And you see on the left that there are all the images with the different lights. And then you see the, let's say, normal photograph, and then you apply some post-processing and you combine the images and you can make visible actually, so you can yeah, make only visible what is under the primary text. And it's not basically done by just taking pictures with different lights, but combining them and applying filters and experimenting a bit with the software. Another very nice example of MSI is the Vercelli Mappamundi. It has been a PhD project by Helen Davis, and she experimented with the software, and she took the images, and then suddenly a king riding on an ostrich on a mountain in North Africa appeared, which was the biggest surprise. There's a very nice podcast on Coding Codices about the MSI project in Rochester, and also the specific manuscript. And I think I also have it in the list of examples on the webpage. So yeah, here you can recover lost drawings on a medieval Mappamundi. So next, we take a look about interfaces. So we get closer and closer to the editions, because now you have the images, and you hopefully also have already added some information. But the way we mostly interact with virtual manuscripts is the interface. So usually they are provided, and I think that's true for editions and also for manuscript collections. You have some sort of faceted browsing. So you have a page where you can search for specific filters, and they differ depending on the collection or on the objects that, and the purpose of the objects that are presented. So for example, here we have the Find collection of seals, and there you can, for example, look for Greek or Latin seals, maybe of the origin. So you have, yeah, and the date. If you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have more different materials. We have more languages, and also some different periods. And for more modern projects, like a collection of letters, you might want to search for persons, or for like for the one that issued and the one that received the letter, the country from where it was written. So the purposes of each virtual collection are different, and the way that you want to access them. So they are not the same for medieval charters as they are for medieval literary texts. If you have a transcription, you can also apply some text-image linking in the interface. So you can visualize the digital facsimile and the transcription. And when you mark a text line on one page, you can also mirror it on the other page. So that's also some sort of interface that we find mostly in digital editions. This example is from the Digital Vercelli book that you might also have seen already last week in the session. And also what we almost always find is some sort of information overview. So you search for a document and then you get a quick overview that tells you the contents, the origin, what texts are in there, the titles, the measures. So you get a quick overview over the digitized object, and then you can go into deeper details. And also something that you find in collections and editions is an index or register. And this also differs on the material that you have. For example, for manuscripts, you can have authors or text that you want to search, scribes, illuminators, the bookbinder, or the place of origin that you can tag and put into a index. You can also have places, which might be more interesting also if you have letters, charters, so objects where places play a large role and an important role. Or another example, which is more abstract maybe for most of us, is if you have letters or documents about biology, you might want to have a list of plants and fungi. So this can be also a helpful tool to browse through a collection and to make it more accessible. So all the data we have seen in the digital libraries is not really new, because also the old school print edition already has the data and the metadata. So sometimes we have digital facsimiles that are printed in books. We have descriptions about the objects. Sometimes we just have some photographs of like one page from a manuscript and then the description of a manuscript, so we can't access the entire manuscript. In addition, we might just have the text and then a reference to the original it was copied from. And you might want to ask why not just use that? But the thing is that a computer has really issues to understand and use the information and to automatically create an interface or analyze the contents. So what we have to do to turn a manuscript into edition or virtual library, we have to structure the data. So a first step can be to look at the printed page and to mark the different components we have, like a name of a place, the ID, like the inventory, it could be the shelf mark. Do we have a date? Do we have a place of origin? Where in the text do we find information about the dimensions? Do we have information about the language? Lots of the information usually will be in a floating text in prose and not in structured ways. So we can start putting everything in a list. And if we have different descriptions, we can also build a data model, like a blueprint, and then in the end, map all the data and use the model as a template and put everything in the same format and structure. So yeah, it's repetitive work to put the information from the text into a table and then maybe model it in some markup language like XML to make it also readable by the machine. Yeah, but we do also encounter some problems. And here I just present one, which is very which we run into very often, and it's the datings. So I think most of you have, or maybe also do it. I would be interested to know how many of you do it. How do you describe dates, especially when they are uncertain? And dates are often uncertain in medieval objects, because we use kind of the language to describe that we are unsure about it, and we make our own arguments. And we have a language that we can understand. So if we say around 1350, we know, okay, it's probably a range of 30 years around the year 1350. And then we can also argument why we think it's the way it is, because maybe of some event that is mentioned, or because we for sure know that it can't be before or it can't be after a specific date. It can be as vague as the beginning of a century, especially when we talk about the 12th century. When did it start? Do we start with 1100? Or do we think the long 11th century maybe started in history more around 1075? We have mid-centuries. We have very broad date ranges between the 12th and 14th century. And something just saying not before a specific year. So what is the start date then? So what we have to do is, for example, to build a table and to make a translation table, how within one project we do translate our date ranges to make it readable for the computer. And if you interact with a digital edition or a digital library, you always have to keep in mind that it might not be as precise, or that there might be mistakes, or that the interpretation has gone wrong, or there is this interpretation behind the data that someone has done at some point. So let's try and do a systematic overview of all the data types that we have in a digital edition and a virtual library. So we already covered the digital facsimiles. We already somehow covered the textual data and transcriptions. We also have editorial annotations, and we have different types of metadata. And if this was like if I was in the same room with you, I would ask you which sorts of metadata we have. But now I'm just going to run through it and give a general overview. So yeah, short, we have the administrative metadata with the bibliographic metadata, rights, provenance, the descriptive metadata that can be layout, pages, writing support, content, short, codicology and chirography of the object. We have the structural metadata, which is very specific for digitized manuscripts and books. I will get to it in a second, and the technical metadata. So you might wonder what the heck is metadata? So it's the data about data, and yeah, digital facsimiles are data, descriptions are data, but they are also at the same time data about data. So the administrative metadata, it's what I call the bibliographic record of the digitized object. There are some common standards in the library world, like the MARC standard and the Dublin core schema, that are vocabularies to describe digital objects and resources, and they track the life cycle of a digitized source. But go back quickly. It's a bit difficult for manuscripts to put them in this very standardized formats that were made for printed books. So the descriptive metadata is a semantic description of the digitized object, and it's less standardized than the administrative data. And it's very specific for historical written documents. As I said before, the bibliographic record is nothing that actually travels with a manuscript, so it's added later, because manuscripts were not born with this descriptive metadata. So we often don't have authorship. We often don't know for sure who was the issuer, the printing press, the scribe, the publisher. We mostly don't know the year of publication unless it was reconstructed later, or there are some hints in the manuscripts. And also there is no list of contents. This is all information that is usually added afterwards when the cataloging took place, or the owner of the book made some inventory and described what they had in their library. Ideally, the descriptive metadata replaces the analog catalog and maybe also extends the digital catalog. And very important, it should always be connected to the digital facsimile of the object if there is a digital facsimile. Structural metadata is really important for digital facsimiles because the images, you can see them as separate. So you have, I mean, if you look on your phone or on your computer, you have these folders full of images, and often there's no structure, or you don't have the time to sort them. And the book is usually held together by the leaves, the page numbers, the quires, the book block, and the book cover. So you have the book in your shelf, and it's not falling apart. But if the binding breaks and the book falls apart, you might have a single page and you don't know where it belonged anymore. And the structural metadata describes and connects the structure of a book. It keeps the images in the right order, and it makes sure that we can look at the images in the viewer in the right order, and that we can also go to a specific page number. And it's a connection to the bibliographic record. So it accommodates the bibliographic and the descriptive metadata, and it links between the paratextual elements. So it ensures the sustainable digital representation, be it in a digital edition or in the virtual library. The technical metadata is, I think, often invisible for many people because we just look at the images, but it is the file format, the resolution, the bit depth, the color, the illumination, and the information about the digitization hardware. So was it a scanner? Was it a camera? Which type of camera was it? It gives us a lot of information about the quality and reliability of the digital facsimile, and it's very important for post and pre-processing like image analysis and ATR. That's something I'm going to look at in a few minutes. So basically in every digital image, we have stored information about the digitization process, and that information can be very important to calibrate the images. Like in this example, we have, again, 2 books from the virtual reconstruction of the Library of St. Matthias in Trier. And on the left, we see the unprocessed image. And next to it, we see the color values, so the colors that were detected. And then we did color calibration for the right image, and you can see how the color pattern does change through the processing. And here it's also very visible. Of course, we have the black background the book is lying on, which is still visible. But yeah, we see how the color scheme changes after post-processing, and to have the colors as reliable as possible, we need to compare them with a color chart. And for that, we need the information from the technical metadata. Just shortly, I already announced that I will be quickly talking about the International Image Interoperability Framework, which is a scheme to facilitate better access to digital images at cultural heritage institutions and to overcome silos, because every institution or many institutions use different softwares, different viewers, and they are not compatible. So it is not possible to simply get the data and put it in your own viewer and compare images. So they build a lot of interfaces, APIs to exchange data between different computers and servers, and also to keep images and metadata connected. So you not just have an image that you download and that loses connection to the library where it was digitized, or the virtual library where it's primarily kept and published. So the most important are the image API and the presentation API. And they, the IIIF manifests are a very important tool to keep the connection between the metadata, the image, and also the library of origin. So it does not get disconnected. And allows us also to view and compare 2 different manuscripts, or even more, from 2 different libraries. So if I'm interested in this manuscript from Tresor, which has been digitized by ECODCS Netherlands, and I want to compare it with a manuscript from Basel, from ECODCS Switzerland, I can just use a viewer like Mirador and put the manifests in and look at both objects at the same time. And for example, I could also display in one window a transcription, and in the other window the digital facsimile, if those are, for example, provided in different editions or libraries. So could, for example, be that I have the transcription of one manuscript and I found another manuscript that contains the same text, and then I can display them side by side and see how much the text has changed, or if the transcription can be used for both originals. So now we already get into the last part of this presentation. And we do look a bit into the working with digitized manuscripts. So as I said, I'm not going so much into the text-based edition, also because I think this will be covered in many of the other sessions, and also because my background is actually in working with manuscripts with images and analyze them and see what we can do with digital representations of medieval manuscripts. So the first thing I want to look at is automatic text recognition. So how do computers actually transcribe text? Because this is crucial to use machine learning to, for example, work on making a digital edition by providing the digital facsimile and the transcription of the text. So we have ATR, this is automatic text recognition. We have OCR, which is optical character recognition, and we have HTR, which is handwritten text recognition. So you might have heard all of it, but maybe you have always wondered what's the difference. And let me help you with that. So optical character recognition is optical scanning based on pattern recognition. And as the title says, it's a character-based recognition on the line level. So we always work with line per line, but each character is transcribed individually. And sometimes it's not always clear what a software is doing, but there's one way how you can recognize OCR software, and that is that the open source software is usually named after cephalopods, so octopus, kraken, and calamari, for example. Kraken is also a scriptorium. You might have heard of that, and octopus, calamari, not sure how much they are still used. Yeah, but Kraken is the software behind a scriptorium from Paris. Handwritten text recognition was developed for the transcription of handwritten text. It always involves a certain degree of interpretation, so it's not based on transcribing each single character as it appears. It's also trained on a line level, and it contains often a lot of, like, a bit of intelligent word recognition, so some software that uses tools to recognize words and then transcribe them. Two examples of HDR software that are quite well known is Transkribus, and the second one, which is open source, is Logi from the Netherlands. And then there is ATR, the automatic text recognition. And I think the distinction of OCR and HTR has vanished a bit with artificial intelligence and machine learning applications. So a lot of applications actually combine both. And it can also be that some software that was founded on OCR is more suited for the medieval book scripts because they reassemble a bit more printed books because they had no personal style, and all scribes were supposed to write exactly in the same way than in modern manuscripts. And also large language models will impact automatic text recognition. So ATR is basically an umbrella term for all software and tools to automatically transcribe text. But actually, the pre-processing steps are always nearly the same. So having a good pre-processing workflow is very crucial. And the pre-processing usually consists of layout analysis and segmentation. So usually when you look at the digital facsimile, you will see the background of the page as well. So to not cut off any of the page, you will usually photograph the entire manuscript with some black background or some background, so you do not lose any information. And then, of course, you have the margins that you might not need when you want to transcribe the main text. So first, you need to see where actually the text is written on the page. So the text fields, the text boxes, is it columns, is it not columns? What other text areas we have on the page. Here, for example, we have a two-column layout, and you also try to recognize the lines, the different colors on the right, the color changes when there is a gap between two letters or two words. That was done, I think that was some experiment with layout recognition. You detect the baselines to have also the ascenders and descenders, and to measure the distance between the lines. And then you can segment and separate the different lines. So this is important for HTR to be able to transcribe line by line. The second project I want to present is my own previous PhD project. And it was a project where we tried to date and localize medieval Latin manuscript with the support of FFF and machine learning. And the idea behind the project was to see if we can develop a tool that can harvest and access digital facsimiles of medieval manuscripts from libraries that offer FFF and look for similar images to help in dating and localizing the medieval manuscript. And on this slide, you see the script development roughly from the 7th to the 15th century. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with medieval Latin scripts, but they do change quite rapidly, and they do contain a lot of information about the time and place they were written. So later in the early modern times, script changed much less rapidly, but got much more individual. So it might be interesting to look for scribes, but here script was supposed not to be individual, but it contained, yeah, indeed a lot of information about the time and place where it was written. So we try to open, like we try to take advantage of the black box of paleography, because I already mentioned the dating and the uncertainty in dating. We have the same for paleography. So scripts are described in a very distinct way, in a lot of in a very specific language. There are a lot of comparisons, and usually it's not like in this example that you describe a half-unshelled script with specific letter forms. So this is one methodology to teach students some basics about script, but it's usually not the way paleographers did describe medieval manuscripts. They might say, yes, the D, I have seen it in a manuscript, dated and localized to that place. It looks similar, and it looks like the style of that scriptorium, but it's usually not expressed in that way. So we can't do character segmentation and say the letter M is specific for that place and that year. So the advantage of machine learning is that we don't need that, because the deep neural network that we used, they process an image and they find their own discriminating features that we can't influence. So we can combine the black box of paleography with the black box of artificial intelligence. And we can also define the number of features, for example, 96 features that are taken into consideration, and they build a vector, and then we have some sort of script fingerprint for each script sample. And then we can store this fingerprint, and then we can use, so we did use conjoined twin convolutional networks. So it's the two convolutional neural networks. In this talk, I'm not going into the details of that, that process the images and that are connected in the end. And then we get a score of similarity between the two samples, and it can tell us if it's a match between two manuscripts or not. So it tells us how similar the script samples actually are. And then, for example, we have one sample that is described very well and the other sample is not. We can go and look into the metadata and look at more parts of the script, and maybe we can get some hints from one manuscript to apply on the other. So it can help us to navigate through the vast collections of digitized medieval manuscripts where the faceted search reaches its limit, because we still have a lot of manuscripts that are not sufficiently described. The descriptions are too vague, and also I think the lifetime of a human can't browse through all the manuscripts, and also our brain can't process too many manuscripts at once, even though we can use AAAF viewers to display a lot of manuscripts next to each other. I think our brains are not capable to compare and remember all the details. So this is an example of the matching from two 9th century manuscripts. So basically, it's one manuscript that I compared with 62 and 55 manuscripts, the same manuscripts, but the 55 is the digital tool, and we had less manuscripts for unknown reasons in our database. And on the left, I matched the metadata, so the place of origin, the century, and the script type. And I tried to visualize how distant the manuscripts are from each other. And we can see not much changes. So we can see the short lines are very similar, and it's a lot from the 9th century that are very similar because the regions are very close. It's mostly Switzerland. Then we have some outliers, and that's actually where some metadata is missing. So this visualization shows us how unreliable some of the metadata is because it's never complete, and sometimes it's too vague, or the computer has processed it not in a complete way because it was not completely machine readable. And then especially the manuscripts, so from the 14th and 15th century, we can actually see that they are quite different because we have more samples also from further distances, and also more manuscripts that have a assigned script type and yeah, a more precise dating actually. And the right diagram shows the same analysis. So I measured the distance from manuscripts from all the centuries to this Codex 207 from Bern, which is from the 9th century, to see if the computer, so our neural network, has learned something. And we can actually see that the manuscripts starting with the 12th century, 13th century are much more distant from the 9th century one. And that actually, despite the leaky and incomplete metadata they were trained on, the machine has learned something and is indeed capable to process image data. So this is just to give one example what you can do with properly digitized and annotated medieval Latin manuscripts if we are not doing an edition and if you do not want to transcribe the text. Yeah, I already come to an end. So if you want to listen to more about topics about digital medieval studies, I can just recommend the Coding Codices podcast. There are quite some episodes, and the new postgraduate committee of the Digital Medievalists just started a new season. So keep your ears peeled on that. There's also one episode on MSI and also on many other digital editions and also the makers of those editions. Thank you for your attention. And I also want to use this occasion to give credits to my colleague Marcel Scheben, who composed this this set of slides with me for our presentation in Bari. So lots of the slides were made by him. And yeah, if you have questions, feel free to reach out also when you watch this presentation, not today, but on a different date. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. This was brilliant. And I'm sure we have several questions from the audience. And of course, as you know very well, people from the audience listening to the live broadcast, you can write your questions and comments to Hannah in the box on YouTube. And yeah, and while waiting for questions, as always, I will abuse my power of as chairperson. And yeah, I noted down so many questions, but I mean, you are in the office here nearby, so we can also actually discuss in person about this. But I think these are also interesting things to be discussed in a broader session like today. But I see that we have already one question, so I will just throw it on the screen, and that's for you.
So everyone can read it. So the decision whether to use OCR, HTR, or ATR, well, I think it's a process of trial and error. So what you want to achieve, but also a lot on the material you have, and also how maybe your personal interaction, because the tools are very different. So yeah, what I've noted actually is that a lot of the if you have texts that are printed, the character-based can work better. But I actually do see a shift into that it's always a combination. So don't have up-to-date insights into the recent developments of, for example, the eScriptorium or Transcribus. But I have the feeling that there is more and more overlapping, but it all started with the different approaches on research interest and what just worked better. So I know that we realized that actually for many medieval Latin texts, book scripts, that actually OCR-based technologies were quite successful compared to HTR-based technologies. But I see that, I think in the future, we probably just talk about ATR, about automatic text recognition. And we can also see that LLMs do a really good job. And I think you always have to combine and try and error. So it's difficult to give advice here, but I think that Scriptorium is a really powerful tool, and it's open source. So yeah, I think that's the recommendation I can give. But yeah.
And adding to this question, do you think that rather than, I mean, my interest would be rather than on the research interest on the type of text bearing object, because I mean, as you know, and as everybody in this term of Sunoikisis knows, I am interested in seals and seals in differently from manuscripts have a very don't have much contrast between the writing and, let's say, and the parchment, which of course isn't parchment, but is the, let's say, the support on which they are written. And I always have in the back of my head to start and do something like this, and it's actually in the making. But what would you use if you were to experiment with some text bearing objects which have a very low contrast between writing and support, even if there were manuscripts?
I think you have to start with a pre-processing, which again is more or less always the same procedure for all kinds of software. And of course, if you use a tool, it often contains already the decisions about pre-processing, but I don't think they will have a lot for text-bearing objects like seals, which have a low contrast. So you first have to develop a pre-processing that makes the text more visible. So to enhance the contrast between the background. So maybe you could use with I mean, I see what my colleagues here are doing, and what we did some 3D prints of seals last week or 2 weeks ago. So we did some 3D prints, and we were looking actually at the contrast, the 3D modeling. So you can measure the imprint, and and we had to experiment, or he had to experiment a bit with the with the size of the seal that he wanted
For
to print,
example, yeah.
and to make maybe the engraving a bit bigger than it is. So you have to enhance maybe. So then you don't get a, of course, real reconstruction of the depth of the script, so of the relief. But maybe you have to enhance that one and make it a bit bigger to get the information about the contours, and then you can apply whatever software that you can install on your computer or that you can use. But I think it's all about the pre-processing, because, for example, for papyri, if you do binarization, you will see the stripes and the like how they are glued together, let's say. So it's very difficult to get. So I had 2 papyrus manuscripts in my data set. The 7th century one were papyrus, and we had really struggles to pre-process them because the same methods we used for parchment didn't work. In paper, because if you do binarization, so if you turn a papyrus document into black and white, you will see what happens. So I would say for seals, you have to work on the contrast of the relief and then try to segment the text first, but it will not work with binarization because there's no difference between background. So you have to work with a 3D modeling, I think, and then use different ways of segmenting the text and separate the text from the background.
Yeah, I think I will start doing this because I mean seals, irrespectively of the fact that they're a very big deal here in Cologne, as you know, but they are actually quite challenging because I mean we have hundreds of thousands of them, and they are all, of course, archaeological objects. So they are their preservation condition. They change a lot in, of course, according to the soil they were buried in. So which means that not only their preservation but also their actual color changes a lot, and they can be 50 shades of gray, let's say, because they are mostly made of lead, and also it's going to be quite challenging. But thank you so much for your answer, also on behalf of our student who says truly the future is here.
And also with seals, I think you have the RTI imaging, which I didn't cover because that would be the expertise of Marcel. But you have different image information compared to the MSI or compared to digital photography. But yeah, you would work definitely on the different image that you have and then segment the text.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much. So again, while we're waiting for other questions, I will just make a remark. So actually several, but I will start from the from something that you said that I really loved. That is the black box of paleography. It's so amazing because I mean and we're talking paleography. We can also say epigraphy. We can also say sigillography. Yeah, I mean, scholarship is so worried about the black box of AI that we don't really, thematize at all the fact that we have always been working with black boxes and criteria for dating. Of course, we do have them in paleography, we do have them in sigillography, but at the end of the day, l'œil paléographique, l'œil sigillographique is always what takes the upper hand, if I can put it like this. So it's not a question, actually, it's just a comment that I really liked what you said there. And
yeah, it's maybe the challenge and the advantage. So that we have to deal with 2 things that are black boxes, but at the same time, we don't need to worry about modeling dates and letter forms because AI doesn't need it. It's possible to find patterns that make sense also to paleographers. So we always said in the project, we want to teach the computer to find paleographically meaningful similarity.
Mhm.
So we said, okay, the date and the place are our ground truth, and the script type maybe because it's connected, so it gets guessed. So it's yeah. So but in the end, AI can work really well with uncertain data compared to other ways of data modeling. But of course, the way we translate data into machine readable formats, it's very important to manage all the data that we produce now with digitization. I think that's something we should always remember.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course, yeah. And also, I mean, speaking of uncertain data, what you said about dating is so crucial, and this is something that should be stressed so much, like establishing so what is the 11th century, what is the 12th century, where do we start them? And also, I mean, that was actually what took us so much time to establish, because also there the black box of dating, what do you mean by the first quarter of the 11th century? And of course, we have both in paleography and in sigillography. I mean, everything that we're saying here is actually applicable to every pre-modern discipline, more or less.
But are the centuries the same in the medieval Latin world and in the medieval Greek world? So
Yeah, you know, I'm saying
don't really
11th.
define, do we
Uh,
know if we define the same centuries or if, yeah, which
exactly,
tradition has which dating? Yeah.
yeah, no, definitely. And of course, we do have like some fixed points, but but at the end of the day, not that many. So it's so crucial to establish at least an internal an internal dating, meaning, you know, something that you at least, because we know very well, I mean, even you yourself, not you, Hannah, I mean, in general, you, whenever you are dating something, even you with yourself, you're not consistent, because it's just impossible. So imagine the internal consistency within one human being, the internal inconsistency within a project, where of course there's more expert people, less expert people, um, and um, and let alone then within a whole discipline. So I'm long story short, it was just a plea to document very, very thoroughly in every project what we mean by dating things, so that at least within let's say academic endeavors, within digital scholarly editions, we are consistent with ourselves, and then perhaps we can apply the same criteria to, yeah, that's that I really love that you really started with that. It's
Yeah,
big.
and you always have to think about when you access an interface, how did they date and how did they translate it into machine readable information? So sometimes, yeah, it's explained,
Exactly.
not, yeah, but you always will lose some information because it, yeah, if you look for 12th century, maybe something that is 12th century will not appear because
Exactly. And
it
but I
was
mean,
too rigidly normalized. Yeah.
yes, that's, let's say, the other side of the coin. That of course the also how to model uncertainty in dating, or not only uncertainty, also diverging scholarly opinions, because of course we also have to, I mean, something that we always need to take into account is that our disciplines are evolving, and of course the knowledge basis that we have now was not the same that we had 30 years ago, and it's certainly not going to be the same that there will be in 30 years. But of course, I mean, we are people who are highly trained in our own disciplines, and
Yeah.
we do everything the best possible way according to the means that we have. And so did the people 30, 50, 100 years before. So it would be, I would say, yeah, a pity that this information just went away. So I think that's something that should be documented and very much and some information shouldn't get lost. And this is too, in my opinion, like too big chunks of information that usually isn't even present in editions and is previous scholarship and uncertainty. So if I don't know, if I can say if I change mind about some dating because more sources come to light, then I should be able to do that, but also to document that and not
Yeah,
to
actually,
hide.
that what happens a lot, because often the digital library or the digital object or also edition, we put together a lot of previous sources. So we now have the chance also to just add all the editions that have been there, all the descriptions, and it might have been the manuscript I had as example, this codex from Bern, or it was another codex from Bern. It was dated in the metadata of the standard description to the 9th century, and then I presented it in a talk last year, or 2 years ago already. No, I think it was last year. And then a colleague of mine said, the manuscript you just showed, it's not the 9th century, it's from the 10th. And then I looked deeper into the data, and there was a dispute. So actually, they copied catalog entries and they picked the newest one, but there was a description that clearly dated it to a later century, and paleographers did see that it was not 9th century, but I just processed the data that was there automatically, because I just said I use the standard description and retrieve automatically some information, some dating. And yeah, that happens when we start combining all the information that is there, and then we maybe don't know anymore what is the most reliable one, or it gets messy. So
Exactly. No,
yeah.
yeah, that's why, I mean, that's why the yeah, I mean, the information should just, I mean, I mean, should be made very, very explicit. That's for lack of a better term, like and documentations. We should just document. I mean, um, in our, I mean, not of course the DH part, but rather the, let's say, very analog part of paleography and sigillography, we tend not to document at all. And this is and it's not it's just not good scientific practice,
No,
period.
I think that's now that we have to think about it, because now it gets a problem to see the lack of documentation of methodologies of all the experts in the field, that they never established a methodology. So you learned from your teachers. So you just maybe also by imitation, like AI does. But there's no written down methodology, because yeah,
Yeah,
it's a lot of intuition that you learn by studying the objects and by looking at a lot of objects, and yeah.
and this is for sure true, because you have to have looked at hundreds of thousands of lines of text, but so does AI. So you have to, in a way, to
Yeah.
combine the best of both worlds. But we have another question. Wait, I will just throw it on the screen. There you go.
Okay, one more question concerning the black box of AI. Did I get you right that constantly testing the validity and reliability of outcomes is crucial to the research process? Yeah, it's called babysitting the learning process. So you test and you see and you say, give feedback. No, we are not there yet, and you set basically thresholds that say, okay, now it's good enough, and we don't need to continue, or you say it's so bad. Like if you have the two examples, for example, you don't want to get it, you want to have it still generic enough to be applied also on different manuscripts and different objects. But yeah, you basically put a threshold, and it's trial and error. And it's called babysitting the learning process. And you have to find ways to understand, because in the beginning you just get a lot of data, and especially if it's numbers, it's very difficult to put them in relation with your vision of similarity. So that's why I started to develop these visualizations to see, okay, I know what the metadata is, I know dating plays script, and then what the AI tells me, which is of course more precise because it can compare 96 features. But yeah, I think I can't emphasize enough the experimental character of AI projects, and I think it's very important, and I think it's also very important to document on it so other people don't make the same mistakes or start again and be frustrated. So I think just to put out and say, okay, this is what I've done, this is what happens, is already very crucial to develop AI tools that can help us in our research in the future. Yeah, and also to learn how to understand how the computer works, because we need to trust the computer and the tools, otherwise nobody will use them. And I mean, there's a lot of people very skeptical about things, and it's good that people are skeptical, but yeah, we need to build systems that we can trust, and so we need to constantly test and check the reliability and document.
Document. That's the big the biggest takeaway of the precisely. We always have to document, and
often we just document the success, but it's also good to document what and why it didn't happen, and then say, okay, if we tweak this parameter, it can maybe work, or like which pre-processing has been done and how well did it work, and to say like, okay, binarization of papyri is a bad idea, or maybe it works, but you have to do it in a different way.
And we should. I fully agree with you that we tend to document only the success, but as you said, is trial and error, and trial and error includes error. I mean, we have to be humble enough to document also the fact that I tried this and that, didn't work, too bad, because otherwise people will keep making the same mistakes, and that's also not fair. Meaning that, I mean, that's we should. I mean, it's
also we want to make progress, so we need to avoid doing start all from scratch again, and
to reinvent the wheel on things that do not really need. Do I need it? Yeah, no, definitely, definitely, and also precisely because of what you said. Wait, I even wrote it down because I liked it so much. Wait. Precisely talking about this, you said that our brain can't process this much information, and also the lifespan of a human being isn't enough to do this thing, and that's also something that we need to take into account. I mean, the fact that we have now so much information regarding paleography, regarding sigillography. We have so many images. And images are crucial, as we saw today, and as you teach us in your research. And we can't possibly even think of doing this without any aid, even if we have IIIF manifestos and everything. Is just not doable, and that's.
And I also think that the experts were like, I mean, Bernhard Bischoff, he must have had an exceptional brain. I don't think that every person is gifted with the memory he had. I mean, he also had a lifetime to do the work he did, and he was a pioneer. And I think not every brain is
exactly. And also we need to be realistic and pragmatic. That's something that I am always accused of being too much, but we need to be it, and also take into account the actual conditions in which we, as a scholarly community, do our work. We are all project based. We all have to. We all have a very, let's say, short time to do what we need to do. And I mean, I'm not here to. I'm not complaining at all. But that's just something that we need to take into account when planning for our work. And that's not, we don't have a lifespan anymore to do this kind of work. And
We also
but
can
still,
see much more than, I mean, we don't need to travel anymore to see. I mean, it's nice if we have the chance. Everyone knows that everyone loves to see originals, and it's like always a special moment to be in touch with the originals. But even if we could travel to all the collections we want to see, we still have much more material available now than we could even travel to in a lifetime, in a lifespan, I think. So it's also a very different position we are at than researchers 50 years ago. Much
for
more
sure,
things written about it. So yeah.
for sure, for sure. And the and also again, we even if we could travel to all the collection, we would be touching so many manuscripts, meaning that for this kind of work, of course, it's a very haptical problem. And of course, we are now talking about text recognition. We are not talking about codicology. That's a whole other thing that, for which I still argue that it's very important. Like for the Archeologia del Libro, it's still very important
Yeah.
to have the actual support in your hands, and it's also a whole other let's say plea that whenever a manuscript is digitized, it should not be locked away and made inaccessible to scholars, and that's a whole other
No, but usually it's like then you have looked at it and you can say, I need to see the original because, and then I think in many cases the chances get higher to actually see it because you already know what you are looking
what you're
for.
looking for.
And also I think when we look at digitization projects and digital editions, it's the teamwork. So we need to collaborate with different experts. And you need to work together to get all the information together. So also getting back to the last question, the research process and the validity and reliability, you need experts. So it's not that the computer will take over. You always need people that are specifically trained on manuscripts and on seals and on the text-bearing objects. So it will always be communication and collaboration to develop every computational based tool. So yeah.
Precisely, and that's something that also should be stressed, because in our fields, there's still the underlying fear that, let's say, I'm just saying this very in a very trivial manner, but that AI will take over.
No.
We're still a long way, and it still needs to be baby steps, as you say, and we still need to, of course, to oversee the process. And it's just a yet another aid that we have
Yep.
to
It's
do
yeah,
our
it's a
job.
support and it gives a new view on the data. So it also changes the perspective. It
Yes.
opens new research possibilities, new research questions. But what I've heard from archivists and librarians that what they like about that collections are digitally available is that people come and have a specific request. And they're not coming to say, oh, I'd like to see that manuscript or that object. So it's usually good for everyone. Like, of course, we don't talk about libraries that generally make access to their objects very difficult.
Yeah.
But I think to have the option, also it saves time if you can do some of the work
Of
digitally and you
course.
don't have to take the pictures and then you say, okay, I've done this and now I need to see that specific manuscript and yeah, fulfill the following tasks.
Of
Like there
course,
are
of course.
pages that I need to that are not visible, readable on the computer or the
Yes.
measurements or some codicology. Yeah.
Exactly, and you can if you have a specific request, you can get also in a much deeper and much more fruitful conversation with the librarian, archivist,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth, because it's not okay. Let's go to the library and browse. It's not anymore like that.
You have done that. The browsing is
Exactly, you've
already
done it
done.
from the comfort of your own
Yep.
office. So that's and that's actually a very interesting point that should be raised whenever there is a resistance in this on either side, if you ask me. And same, of course, goes for seals also, because I mean, you how can I say it, for manuscripts at least, we're dealing with things that are actually legible most of the time, because they are in a normal format that you can actually read. But whenever you deal with seals, they are things that if you have them in your hands, of course it's amazing, because getting in touch with the originals, it's always great. But they're always so corroded, so in such a bad shape that it's having them in, and they're so small, because I always show it's like a €2 coin, that it doesn't make, I mean, it doesn't make things better to have them in your hands. So it's much better to have a big picture on your screen to actually work with them in a scientific way. And actually, lately, as a matter of fact, there is a debate that seals are so unreadable or so difficultly readable that this has triggered a whole debate on whether they were actually supposed to be read, or if there's also or if there's only like the symbolic value of sealing something. So to make a long story short, also for this kind of objects that are actually that we want pictures of, because it's actually much better to have pictures to work with than to have the actual object in your hands. So that's also something that should be stressed when working with these tools, by all means.
Yeah, definitely.
But really, by all means. Would you like, Hannah, to explain, like, for 2 minutes, that the 2 minutes that we still have, what we're going to do in the exercise? And I say it again to people who are enrolled in my class in the summer term 2026. You should do the exercise, and for everybody else who is looking at this video later, please feel free to do that. It's always better to do an exercise in order to see if we actually understood what our speaker talked about.
Okay, I can do it very quickly. So the idea behind the exercise is to engage a bit with the resources I've talked about, and also with the techniques. The exercise is to pick one of the projects that I listed above in the description and the resources, or you can use any other virtual manuscript library or library presentation of text-bearing objects or digital editions that includes some sort of digital facsimiles or like digitized objects. So it can also be something from your own field of research, something you work with or you always wanted to look at, and then answer the following questions. The field of study the project is from, the types of objects it does deal with, the target audience. So if you look at a manuscript, for example, a collection, for example, what do you think was the target audience the project was built for? The kinds of data it does provide. So maybe you find something about the digitization process, how deep is the metadata, all sorts of those things. And also which features the user interface have. So what can you do actually with the web page, with the edition, with the virtual library? And as the last question, what do you think is missing in the web presentation? So just engage with one virtual library or digital edition, and briefly describe it, and use the questions are more a guideline how to engage with the project, and then document it a little bit. And
Thank you so much. And with this, I would say that we can close our session. Thank you so much, Hannah. This was really, really inspiring.
Thank you for having me.
And I will see you all next Tuesday, May 12th, for our fourth session about linked open data in digital scholarly editions. And we will have other two very good friends, Daniele Fusi and Paolo Monella. Having said that, have a great evening in our time zone, and thank you again, Hannah, and bye-bye.
Bye.